Hello, good morning or good afternoon, depending where you are. Welcome to Outback Power's Autumn Webinar Series. My name is Gwendolia Espy, and I'm an applications engineer here at Outback Power. So today we're going to go over at a high level of what grid support is. So today we're talking about UL 1741 SA, California Rule 21, HECO Rule 14H, and more. And these are all essentially grid support functions is what we're talking about today. So we'll go over high level what grid support is, and then we'll get into the technical updates and programming. So you will all be muted during this webinar. We will have a Q&A session at the end, so feel free to ask questions during the webinar if a question comes up that you think of. And this webinar, I think, should take about 30 to 40 minutes, depending on questions too. All right, let's get started. So here's an overview of what we will be talking about. We'll be talking about what is SA, or what's California Rule 21, or what's Rule 21, or HECO, what is all this I'm hearing? What is it? And what do I need to know about it? Second is Outback Solutions, so what solutions we provide. Also some technical updates to those solutions. And then we're going to go talk about GIP files. And what does it have to do with you? So if you've seen my last webinar about UL 1741 SA, the first two topics will be a review. If you want a more technical explanation on these functions and what they do, please visit Outback Power or our channel on YouTube. And it's called UL 1741 SA, What You Need to Know. So we won't be going too technical on what grid support actually does, but we have content already if you are interested. All right, so what is SA? What is California Rule 21 I'm hearing? What's HECO? Well, at this time, if someone is talking about that, they're probably referencing the same thing, and that's grid support. So first, we are going to start off with an analogy to better explain the relationship between the requirements and the standards and the settings, etc. So let's walk through this analogy. All right, so first, let's say that for whatever reason, we need people who can jump. We need people who can jump. That is the need. All right, and then let's say I need people who can jump 3 feet. And then let's say you need people that can jump 5 feet. For whatever reason, my application, my requirements are different than yours. For my application, I need people who can jump 3 feet, and you need people who can jump 5 feet. Well, what we can both do is point to a test standard or even a test facility that will test these people to put their stamp that they verified how far each person can jump. So the test standard might say, well, they all need to wear a specific shoe, they can't use a trampoline, they each get 30-foot running head start, and they must jump from concrete into sand. And the horizontal distance is what that is measured is the verified feet that they can jump. So, or a national laboratory may test these people per that standard and put their stamp on it. Okay, that might be a little bit too far of an analogy, but this is how it all relates. So this is where our analogy comes together with our topic. So for utilities, the need is grid support. They want inverters to be able to help the grid out during short disturbances or brownouts. In other words, support the grid. So HECO Rule 14H, which is specific to Hawaii, and per our analogy, they're saying, hey, we want 3 feet. California Rule 21, specific to California, and per our analogy, they're saying, hey, we want 5 feet. They're both wanting different settings because they have different grids. They both point to UL 1741 SA, which is the test standard to verify that the inverters can perform to their requirements. So they both have different needs. They both want grid support. but the specific settings will be different for both of these. But they both point to this test standard, and that's what ends up being marked on the inverter, saying that the UL 1741 assay that the National Laboratory has tested per these requirements. All right, so that's the end of our analogy. So what does this say? So UL 1741 assay, like we talked about, is a test standard by which we certify our inverters that they meet HECO Rule 14H requirements and that they meet California Rule 21 requirements. So, and this really has, so the PV market has grown, and the industry has seen increasingly grid instability, and that can be due to actually previous standards that required inverters to immediately disconnect when they were exceeded this very narrow voltage and frequency window. So when they did that, it actually caused a reverse effect of a surge. So if the grid became slightly unstable, a whole bunch of inverters, if you had a lot of PV in a certain area, a whole bunch of inverters would disconnect at the same time, making the situation worse. So here we are, now they're saying, hey, stay connected and support the grid a little bit longer. So starting September 8th, new installations in Hawaii and California, and actually now other states are requiring inverters to be listed as providing grid support or smart inverter functions. And I do want to say that this, grid support, this only applies to inverters that you plan to interconnect with the utility, with the grid. This does not apply to off-grid systems. This only applies to interconnection. So if you have an off-grid system, this topic is not applicable. Okay. All right, so California and Hawaii are the two states solidly requiring grid support functions. East and Central Pennsylvania, so PPL Electric Utilities, has also implemented the requirements of grid support. And I think they're planning on following the California Rule 21 requirement settings. But I think they are. I'm not quite sure. And I just got news last week that new write-throughs and grid support requirements with SA certification will go into effect January 1st, 2018 for areas served by National Grid. So this will affect Massachusetts, New York, and Rhode Island. And I'm not really sure what, if they're going to be creating their own requirements. So let's see here. So I'm not sure, they might be creating their own, so there could be requirement C, and that might be, National Grid, or if they might follow California Rule 21 settings. But they're starting January 1st, they're going to be requiring this. So I think the story here is that states are, looking at this as, as something they would like too. So if you're not in any of these states that I mentioned, I would be aware of what's going on around your area, because it could be just around the corner. All right, so, once the new IEEE 1547 is published, which will also include all of these types of functions, the grid support functions, these types of functions will be required nationally. So right now, IEEE is, the national voluntary standard for interconnection. So states right now didn't want to wait for this new standard to get published. They've been waiting for a long time, so they're actually asked to, state by state are requiring this before this national standard is being published. So once this gets published, these type of functions will be required. All right, so not all grids are the same. So the settings that will be required will not be identical throughout the United States or throughout the world. Functions will be enabled or disabled, and the settings for the functions will be different for each region. So as you can see, HECO, which is Hawaii, requires 2 additional functions that California did not require. And that's because those grids are different. So Hawaii requires frequency watt and volt watt. And like I mentioned earlier, I go more in depth about what these functions do and how they work in my other webinar. So you can just go to outbackpower.com or our YouTube channel, Outback Power, if you want to know what these do. So Hawaii requires frequency watt and volt watt, where California doesn't. They don't need that functionality, or they haven't required it yet. But Hawaii and California both require low and high voltage ride-through. So just as a just as a review, so ride-throughs before inverters were to immediately disconnect. And now they're saying, hey, we want you to ride through, we don't want you to immediately disconnect, we want you to ride through over a period of time. And that could be, it could be 0.1 seconds, it could be half a second, it could be 10 seconds, depending on what the range is. So Hawaii and California both want ride-throughs, but even when they want the same function, their settings could be different between the two. So Hawaii could say, we want you to ride through for half a second, and California will say, we want you to ride through for 2 seconds. So even though they want the same functions, the settings within those functions could be different. It just depends on their requirements. Yeah, and then I think that's it for that. Okay, so Outback Solutions. So Outback's inverters are advanced enough to have the ability to support these new features. So these are inverters that you've installed before, but now with new grid support functionality. So they have the same form factor, they have the same spare parts, and we were able to meet the criteria through software development. We also will be providing GIP files that will streamline settings for your area. And I'll go over later at the end of this webinar what this is and how to set that up. So both our Radian FXARS are available today with grid support functions. They've been tested, and then they have the UL marking per the standard. So they're listed and marked. Okay, so I'm going to briefly talk about sort of this transitional period. All right, so previously we've had our GS8048A. However, we have added a -01, and these are our inverters that have the grid support functions. They're marked. They have the SA marking, or not. Actually, they don't have SA directly on them, but I'll show you how to identify that they're SA. So because our distributors for this transitional time period, which is pretty much last month to now, and we'll see when that transition period is over, but our distributors may have both in stock, or other distributors may. So in order to clearly identify what inverter that you may need or that you're getting, we added this -01. So now on our price list, you can only purchase our -01. Previously, you could choose between the two, but now we are only producing inverters with grid function capabilities. So another location where you can be confident that you're getting an SA unit. We also, on the box, it will have GS4048A-01. So that's also an indication that you have a unit that is listed and certified. And lastly, our inverters will have an indication on the inverter itself that it has grid support functions. So UL 1741SA says, inverters shall be marked grid support interactive inverter or grid support utility interactive inverter. And this is true whether it's an Outback product or another manufacturer complying with UL 1741SA or California Rule 21 or HECO Rule 14H. So you really want to look for, that's what you want to look for, is either grid support interactive inverter or grid support utility interactive inverter. So this is a screenshot of our label. So this is actually just a portion of it. Our label is much larger than this. But here it says grid support utility interactive inverter/charger. And that's an indication that you have a unit that complies with the standard. However, to make this a little bit easier for you, we've also added an additional label that just plainly says Grid Support Utility Interactive Inverter. So you want to look out for this label as well if that's what you're looking for. And that's true for both our radians and FXARS. All right, so now we're going to get into technical updates. So these are changes, technical changes that are, if you're familiar with our products, these are just some changes that you may want to be aware of. And all of this will be in a manual or some other type of documentation. All right, so our inverters are stackable with older units, and that's only with the A models. So you can mix a GS4048A with a GS4048A-01. However, in a system with multiple inverters, so that's what we're talking about, all inverters must be at the same firmware revision. So if this is the situation, one will need to upgrade all inverters with the new firmware. So in this case today, that is 1.6.63. And we have an application note that addresses the steps to successfully perform this. Some settings may change. With the new inverters or upgraded firmware, you must use a Mate 3S. So you have to upgrade with a Mate 3S, and then you will have to also make sure your Mate 3S firmware revision is 1.1.0 or higher. And we also have an application note that describes how to upgrade this successfully. And I'll go over one thing the next slide that's related to this. So as I mentioned in the previous slide, that we have an application note that addresses the steps to successfully perform this, as some settings may change. So if you do upgrade an inverter to 1.6.63, it will increase the AC current resolution by 1/4 amp. So what this does is it affects your current settings to become 1/4 of your original settings. So you may want to readjust your settings back up to your desired value. So here I have a table that kind of shows what might happen. So we have your grid AC input, gen AC input, these settings here. So if you originally had them set for 50 amps, when you upgrade, it will be at 12.5. So if you wish to, if you originally wish to have it set to 50, you just have to scroll back up to 50 amps. And this will be in an application note. And actually, let's go find that application note. I can show you where it is. Okay. All right, hopefully you can see my screen still. Actually, let's do that. Okay. All right, so I'm at the Outback Power website. We're on the home page. And we'll go to support and we'll go to documents. All right, so here's where all of our documentation is. On the left-hand side, we have a link that says App Notes. All right, so here are a bunch of our application notes. Second to last is upgrading inverter to revision 1.6.63 and updating it inverter AC current inputs. So we just click on that. And here's your application note on how to successfully do that. So if you are in a situation where you do need to update your system, this would be a great reference. All right. So the next item is talking about the cell current limit. So in the past, the AC input limit was the end-all be-all, and now the grid AC input limit actually does not. Okay, so in the past, sorry, let me start over. So in the past, the grid AC put limit, when it was set to 10 amps AC, and the cell current limit was set to 30 amps AC, it would actually be capped at 10 amps. So this grid AC input limit was the end-all be-all. It would limit any AC that input, since you sell through the input. Now, the grid AC input limit and cell current limit are independent. So if the grid AC input limit was set to 10 amps AC, it will not limit the cell current. So if the cell current was limited to 30 amps, the cell current limit will attempt to sell 30 amps AC. So in the past, it was limited by this setting, and now they're independent. All right, so from a documentation perspective, we'll go over the manuals and some documentation information that will be helpful for you. So we have manuals, authorization to mark, and other documentation are all available online. Some of you may be asked for some documentation providing proof of compliance. So we'll go over some of that. So some background. So the revision of UL 1741 with SA was published September 7th, 2016. So this image below is a snapshot of our authorization to mark. Our authorization to mark actually does not say SA. It has UL 1741 2010 edition 2 plus R07 September 2016. So this is that revision that was released September 7th, 2016, and that is your SA. So really what that means, 7 September 2016 means SA and the authorization to mark. Well, let's go back to the website. Let's see. And I'll show you an example of where to find that. All right, so we'll go to products and let's go to the radian. So we have our GS48A models. Okay. And then we'll scroll down. On the right-hand side, we have a bunch of documentation. Here we have our verification of conformity, authorization to mark, UL 1741 SA GS series. So let's click that. I'll skip this part for now. All right, so we have our authorization to mark. Let me zoom in here. So here you can see that snapshot. So it's UL 1741 2010 R07 September 2016. That's your SA from the authorization to mark. And included in this is also, included this is our verification of conformity, and this comes from our NERDL. And this actually does say SA on it. I think this will be helpful if you need it for some reason. So this says relevant standards, UL 1741 supplement SA grid support utility interactive inverters and converters, and also has that date, September 7th, 2016. So here's a verification of conformity and authorization to mark if you need that type of documentation. Okay. All right, so now we're going to be talking about GIP files. So when you receive an inverter that is listed to UL 1741 SA, it means it has the capabilities to perform grid support functions. So different regions want grid support, but they want different settings that are specific to their area. So as an installer, you need to ensure that the settings are such to meet your local jurisdiction. So that's what I'm going to go over right now. By the way, there is a video that goes over this for your reference. It's at Watt School channel on YouTube, and we'll actually be looking at that video later too. Yeah, so So with GIP files, just so like a review, so at our top of our, yeah. So what GIP files does, so this 3 feet, 5 feet analogy, the 3 feet isn't really for, Hawaii, it's like 60, 60 plus settings. So they want 3, 2, 1.5. There's a whole bunch of settings that they want in this package. So the GIP file provides everything that they need all in one, download. And then, California has their own profile. So the GIP contains all of that information. All right. So before, though, loading a GIP file, you need to have access to the Grid Interface Protection menu. So the Grid Interface Protection menu contains sensitive settings. So there is an extra layer of protection from an accidental change. An installer entering this menu should be authorized and qualified personnel and really intentional about changing these settings. So an installer needs to change their password from default in order to see the menu. There's documentation and videos, and actually there's another video from Watt School are available, and it shows you how to do this. So without changing your password, this menu or the selection will not show up. It will be hidden. So you must change your installer password in order for this to show up. This will not show up for your user password. It will only change or show up for your changed installer password. So Outback is providing what we call GIP files. And so like I said before, a GIP file contains a package of grid support settings associated with different utility companies or regional standards. Otherwise, installers, we need to set up to 66 different settings in order to comply. And that's a long time, and time is money, right? So a GIP file is like a configuration file, but it's specific to grid support settings. So we're going to go over, okay, so I'm going to go over live what you should do. So first, you start out with a blank SD card, and you insert that card into your computer or some type of device that can download from the internet. So generally a computer. So once you do that, your SD card is in your computer, you're going to go to Outback Power. And there, under the Resources tab, there is something called Grid Support. So, after us talking about this, I think we all know what this is. So this is what we're talking about. So Grid Support. So we want to click on that. Okay, so there's several different tabs. Oh, here's my other webinar that talks about more technically about what the different functions do, a little bit more background information, and we have a white paper, a change notice. So this page really is great to for anything really related. It has a lot of great information and videos on how to do stuff. So okay, we're going to go to affected products and GIP files. So that's what we're talking about right now. So here are our GIP files here. So right now we only have really California and Hawaii. So that's all the profiles that we know right now. IEEE 1547. So this is actually what comes standard in every inverter. So it's just IEEE 1547. So if you want to comply with California or Hawaii, you have to do this step. Otherwise, you're just doing IEEE 1547. So we have a California Electric Tariff Rule 21. We have California Electric Tariff Rule 21 load shed or transfer. So this is an exception. Either one is okay. It just depends on what the end users, what they would prefer. And I can go over that too. And then we have Hawaiian Electric Company for the islands of Hawaii, Maui, and Oahu, and then a Hawaiian Electric Company for Lahaina and Molokai. This is the README file. So let's open that up and I can show you what that looks like. Okay, so this is the first tab. It just describes, things like the MATE3S must be used, what models is applicable for. This is the default settings. and it has a little bit more information on what the files are actually called and what relates to what islands or what region. So here we have all of our profiles. If more profiles come up with other states, this will get updated with those profiles as well. And so here we have California Electric Tariff Rule 21 SRD. So this is your original California Rule 21. And the second profile is an exception that allows load shadow transfer. So if you have the capabilities of taking load off the grid or taking it with you, which we do as a battery, battery-based inverter, that we can actually have different settings. So it would just disconnect from the grid and take the load with it. So you can choose either of these settings if you're in California. Okay, so here are, the second tab, GIP Files and Settings. This contains all of the profiles again, and this actually has all of the different settings that you would have to do manually if we didn't provide this GIP file. So that's over 66 settings. So if you're curious about what the settings are for your specific area, you can look here and take a look and see what the differences are. And like I said before, if we get more, if we have more profiles that are required, we'll continue to add those here, so you can check it out. Okay, I'm going to close out of here. Actually, okay, so once we figure out which profile we need, you can just go ahead and click on it. It will download here, and this is where I'm going to go to the video. It kind of shows it. Okay, so they're going to grid support, affected products and GIP files. These are your GIP settings. And then we have our README file called Excel document. So we're going to click on Hawaii for Maui and Oahu. Open up the document, right click, and extract to your SD card. Once you have that GIP file, so you should see HECO, for example, here we have HECO Z1R1.GIP. That's what you want. So make sure you extract that to your GIP file. Safely eject your SD card. Insert the SD card into your Mate3S. Now enter your changed installer password. Go to Settings, then Inverter, and then you should be able to now see the Grid Interface Protection menu. There it is. Again, only authorized and qualified personnel should be accessing this. Okay, press continue. Actually, let me go back. So you're going to get this. You're going to get this grid interface warning, protection warning. So this is saying the same thing, that hey, you need to know what you're doing in order to enter this menu. So you have to accept that, hey, I know what I'm doing. Press continue. All right. So here we have our grid interface protection menu, and this contains our operating frequency, which is 50. You can choose between 50 and 60 hertz. It contains your mains loss, so the reconnect time to grid or AC input when the mains are lost. It has the cell current limit, so if you want to change that, you would enter this grid interface protection menu in order to change that. Then we have our grid support. So hopefully you don't have to go in here. So this is if you want to manually set all your settings, you could go in here and do it, but we're providing GIP files so that you don't have to do that. And then we have our upload grid protection. So I'll continue. So you enter that menu, upload grid protection, and there is our GIP that we loaded. If you end up saving multiple GIP files, for example, if you're in California and you just want to have both on hand, they both will show up on this menu, and you just have to use a scroll wheel to select which one you want to upload. So you just press upload. It says uploading grid protection oops, it says grid uploading grid protection, and then once it's done, it says grid protection settings uploaded. And you just press continue and you're done. That's it. So yeah, so we're just trying to make this as easy as possible for you. And we're trying to make sure that you are meeting your local jurisdiction's requirements. So yeah, so this is what we did. Slide form. All right, so we do have a lot more information. So like I mentioned, under the resources tab, there's that grid support selection that has our grid support webinar, how to upload a GIP file. Online on our website, we have upgrade app note that we talked about. Our GIP files are there and available, and then there's also some more information. All right, well, that is all the material that I have for today, and so we'll go into the Q&A session. Let's open up the questions. So if you have questions, this will be the perfect time to do that. All right, so there should be a chat. There should be a chat portion to this. So if you see a question or a chat on your menu, that would be the place to submit your questions. And if you'd like me to go back to a slide in order to ask your question, feel free to mention that too. Okay, so we have a question here. Everything's going to be configured in the Mate 3 screen, or can I work in a computer? Okay, so I'm thinking that you're asking if the only way to upload the GIP file would be through the Mate 3, or is there an option to do that through the computer? Right now, the only option, yeah, is to configure that with using a Mate 3. All right, are there any other questions? I'll just wait one more minute and then we'll wrap it up. Okay, another question. The SD card is the same to upgrade the Mate 3. Yes, you can use the same SD card to upgrade the Mate 3S. So if you need to upgrade your Mate 3S from 1.00 to 1.1, yeah, you can use the same SD card. All right. There is another question. Does it matter the format because the Mate 3 needs F32 or something like that? I don't. Let's see. I actually do not know. I'm not really familiar with that, but let me follow up with you in an email, and we can sort out your questions about the Mate 3 in reference to this essay. So I wrote your name down. All right. Well, again, my name is Gwendoline Espy. I'm applications here engineer here at Outback Power, and I really am glad that you're able to come here, and thank you, and I hope you found this valuable. Thanks.